The air was not supposed to be this cold. Not here. Not in what used to be Sudan. Snow swirled like ash across a dead white plain, covering twisted trees that had no right standing in such bitter silence. 1,000 years of desert heat undone by the terraforming ambitions of a race not born of Earth, not even born of stars. The reclaimers called it progress. The humans called it extinction in slow motion. In the middle of that icy waste, beneath the withered husks of trees now brittle as bone, a lone man stood, his coat torn, lips cracked, blood frozen stiff across his collar. He did not know what day it was anymore. The days had stopped mattering. When the sun began flickering like an old bulb in the sky, across from him, sitting atop a jagged white rock that had not always been there, a child giggled. Not human. Her skin shimmered like pearl and smoke, flickering in and out of visibility. 2 eyes glowed cobalt, unblinking. Her laughter was strange, not cruel, not mocking, just detached. A curious amusement at something only she seemed to understand. She wasn't dressed for the cold, but the cold didn't seem to notice her either. Around her, snowflakes paused mid-fall, caught in tiny spheres of manipulated time. It was like reality bent a little to make her more comfortable. That made her dangerous. She tilted her head like a bird, watching the man stagger on frostbitten feet, and then pointed with one finger toward the white clearing ahead. There something moved. Shapes, low to the ground. Muscles rippling beneath patchy fur. Lions, the old kind, not the ones humans bred in failing zoos, but wild ones, hungry ones. Modified by the alien climate, now they had grown paler, leaner, more desperate. A pack of 4 crept from the edge of the clearing, their paws silent against the powder. They stopped not out of rage, not even hunger. It was instinct, the kind that remained after all else had frozen away. The man turned slowly, stiffly, and saw them. He didn't run. Running wouldn't have helped. He just stood there, chest rising slowly, like he'd accepted some great law of the universe. The child laughed again, higher now. Not unkind, not kind. Just fascinated. The man's name was Cade. His beard was crusted with frost and blood. His alad. Breath shallow. Somewhere, long ago, he'd been a soldier. Not for Earth's army, those collapsed decades ago, but for his village. His family, his sick sister, whose name he hadn't spoken in weeks because saying it meant she still mattered. His hands were torn where the metal gloves had broken, and his body ached with the echo of fights he no longer remembered winning. But in this moment, none of that mattered. Only the girl. Only the lions. He met her gaze, not angry. Just tired. What do you want from me? He asked in a voice hoarse from frost and grief. She didn't answer with words. Instead, she raised her hand and closed her fingers slightly. Not a command, more like a test. A puzzle. 1 lion stopped. 2 moved forward. She wanted to see something, a reaction, maybe mercy, maybe fear. Cade didn't flinch. He looked past the lions, past the death that approached in quiet steps, and into the girl's eyes. And he said something no one had said to her before, not in any language, not on any of the broken worlds her kind had passed through. You're alone, aren't you? The laughter stopped, not slowly, not hesitantly. It was like a wire had snapped inside her. Her hand dropped. The lions paused, confused by something ancient in the way Cade spoke, a tone that didn't belong in the new world. Wind howled through. The bones of the trees. The snow began to fall faster now, thick and clinging. The girl blinked slowly. For the first time, her skin stopped shimmering. She became solid, real, a child. Small and fragile and impossibly old all at once. Cade took 1 step forward. His legs almost buckled, but he didn't let them. Not yet. Who are you? He asked, softer now. I don't remember, she whispered. Voice like shattered glass and summer rain dot, and then like a signal had been cut. The lions turned and slinked back into the trees. The moment passed, but nothing would ever be the same. Again, asterisk, the silence that followed was the kind that made people believe in gods again, not the kind you prayed to, but the kind you feared had stopped listening. Snow crunched under Cade's boots as he moved forward, slow and steady, like approaching a sleeping animal. His body screamed for rest, but something deeper kept him upright, something he hadn't felt in years. Purpose. Not revenge, not survival. Just the pull of someone who didn't want to be alone. The child, whatever she was, didn't move. She sat still as the snow thickened around her bare feet. Her breath, unlike his, didn't fog the air. Cade stopped. A few feet away, studying her. The shimmer on her skin had faded now, replaced by a strange dullness, like the magic had dimmed. Her eyes still glowing, but dimmer watched him the way a dying star watches its final orbit. There was no fear in her, only a kind of still sorrow, like she had waited so long to be seen that she no longer believed anyone could. "You're freezing," Kate said, though she clearly wasn't. Still, he unstrapped the tattered thermal wrap from his shoulder, the last real insulation he had. Without hesitation, he knelt before her, offering it gently, not forcing it on her, just leaving it there in case. His fingers, split at the knuckles, bled into the snow. She didn't speak, but her head tilted in that curious way again. Then her tiny hand reached out, not to take the wrap, but to touch his wrist. The contact was featherlight, but it burned. Not with pain. With memory he gasped in that flash of touch. He saw images not his own. A shattered moon hanging over. A violet ocean, fires blooming across cities with spiral towers, creatures with voices like bells fleeing into black ships, and her sitting at the center of it all, untouched, unwanted, unused. A tool made to observe. A weapon. Never fired. A child never held. When she pulled away, Cade's breath was ragged. "What are you?" He asked again, not with fear this time, but awe. "I watched your species before they even knew to look at stars," she said, her voice now clearer. "I saw your wars, your kindness, your strange loyalty to things that hurt you. I watched you die and die and die, but never vanish." "Why?" Cade leaned back, blinking the cold from his eyes. "I don't know," he said honestly. "Maybe because we don't know how to stop." She studied him as if the words were pieces of a puzzle. She couldn't quite fit. Then she gestured to the clearing behind her. Where once the lions had stalked, now only footprints remained and something else. A small object, silver and blinking faintly in the snow. It hadn't been there before. Cade stood and walked to it cautiously. A transmitter. Old tech, human-made. Picked it up, frowning. The kind that old Resistance had used before the Reclaimer satellites burned the skies clean. But why was it here? It was still warm, active. "You brought me here," he said slowly. Looking back at her she nodded once. "I needed someone who would not shoot first. That's a rare thing now." "You are a rare thing." Cade let out a bitter breath. "You sure about that?" "I'm half broken. Lost. I don't even know what I'm trying to protect anymore." "That is why you can be trusted." The wind howled louder, pushing snow into his eyes. He shielded them with one hand, staring at her. She looked so small against the storm. He knew she was powerful, dangerous even, but she seemed lost. Like a child who had wandered away from the machine that built her. "What do you want from me?" he asked again. She didn't answer at first. Instead, she stood slowly and walked toward him. Her feet didn't leave prints in the snow. She pointed toward the northern horizon, where a line of blinking red lights marked the edge of a Reclaimer colony tower, piercing the cloud cover like a spear of artificial dawn. "There's something inside that place, something buried. I cannot reach it, but you can. And why should I?" Cade asked, not angry, just tired. "Because if you don't, more children will learn to laugh at pain." That stopped him cold. The words struck deeper than any blade. He looked at her again, not as an alien, not as a threat, but as a mirror. She had been watching humanity, maybe all her life. Maybe for centuries, maybe forever. And now she was asking for something. Not power, not conquest, but help, to understand, to fix. He nodded slowly, not because he believed in success. Not because he wanted redemption, but because someone had to say yes, even if they were the last one left to do so. They walked together in the snow, a man and a creature from the edge of time, neither fully trusting, yet neither willing to part. The wind had settled for now, but the cold was deeper, a cold that seemed to come from within the earth itself, as if the soil resented what had been done to it. Cade's boots crunched through crusted layers of ice, his breath a ragged cloud, and each step forward sent fire lancing up through his shattered knees. But he didn't stop, not now. The girl floated beside him, not quite walking, not quite gliding, always just a few inches off the ground, untouched by gravity, snow, or pain. And yet there was a weight to her, a sadness that pulled at the air around her like gravity from a dead star. They didn't speak for a long time. There was no need. The silence between them had become a bridge, fragile but growing stronger with each shared moment of not dying. The tower ahead pulsed red like a heartbeat buried in stone, and Cade knew what waited inside would be more than guns or machines. There would be memory, secrets, maybe even hope. But hope was dangerous. Hope was what killed men who'd lived too long. "Do you have a name?" he asked finally, eyes squinting against the glare of false sunlight. She paused, as if surprised by the question. Not anymore. But you did? I think so, she said softly. It was taken from me when they made me watch. Cade didn't ask what. He could guess. He had seen cities fall to reclaimer beams that stripped matter to the bone. He had seen mothers turn to ash while their children clung to the vapor of their hands. He had seen mercy used as bait, kindness punished by extermination. Whatever she had watched, whatever they had forced her to witness, it had broken something in her that might never be rebuilt. You can call me Cade, he offered, his voice low, careful. She glanced at him with a strange expression. Not joy, not thanks. Something older. Something like longing. Then I will be Nea, she whispered. That name is gone from the records. It means nothing now. Then it's perfect. She smiled, faintly. And for a heartbeat, she almost looked human. They came to a collapsed overpass where metal skeletons jutted from the snow like the ribs of a long-dead beast. Cade knelt to examine a rusted hatch that had once led down into the Earth's power grid, long since abandoned. The Reclaimers never used human architecture. Too chaotic. Too hopeful. They built their towers on top of our bones, but never within them. As he cleared the hatch, his fingers numbed from the frost, Nea knelt beside him, watching closely. Her glow flickered with the effort, like a candle about to die. Why do you keep helping me? She asked suddenly. He didn't look at her. Because you stopped the lions. That was not kindness, she said. I was testing you, I know, but you stopped. I was curious. That's what empathy is sometimes, Cade muttered. A kind of curiosity that hurts. Nea fell quiet. Her fingers hovered just above the snow, tracing patterns that melted as soon as they formed. I didn't think humans could feel that anymore, she said. After everything. Cade gave a bitter laugh. It's the only thing we're good at. Feeling through the ruin, loving through the pain, carrying grief like a fire we can't put down. He finally got the hatch open, and they descended into the dark. The tunnels beneath the tower had once carried power to a city that didn't exist anymore. Now they were filled with echoes. Old graffiti clung to the walls and faded paint. We remain nitrogen monoxide gods, just us. And one phrase repeated over and over in dozens of hands. Find the child. Nea stopped in front of it, staring. I've seen this before, she whispered. And memories not my own. Cade touched the letters. My people were good at slogans. Not always good at following them. Did they mean me? I think they meant anyone who still could feel. Nea's hand trembled as it reached for the writing, and when her fingers touched the wall, a sudden pulse of light flared from her chest. Not harsh, soft, like the memory of sunlight through leaves. It spread out, warming the tunnel walls, revealing long-forgotten carvings, messages, stories left behind by those who died in this place. Children, families, resistance cells. All gone now. But their words remained. She turned to him, eyes shimmering, and for the first time, tears welled there. They tried, she said, voice cracking. They tried so hard to keep each other alive. And they failed, Cade said, quietly, but they didn't stop trying. She replied. They stood in the hush of the tunnel, surrounded by voices etched in stone and steel. And between them, something solid formed, not trust, not yet, but understanding. The beginning of belief, not in gods, not in victory, but in each other, asterisk, the tunnel deepened into darkness. So complete that even sound seemed afraid to follow. Cade's headlamp flickered with dying battery life, and the glow from Nea's body had faded again, leaving only the weak gleam of bioluminescent moss clinging to the ancient walls. Somewhere above them, the Reclaimer Tower pulsed like a distant heartbeat, and Cade felt the vibration of it through his boots. They weren't far now, and with every step, the weight of what they were about to face grew heavier. Like the air itself had been compressed by time, the silence broke with the hum of old Earth tech, the unmistakable whirring of magnetic locks. Cade turned, weaponless but alert, as the tunnel ahead lit up in rings of dim blue light, each one revealing more of the structure buried beneath the tower. This wasn't a power conduit or forgotten bunker. This was something else, something sacred. Human hands had carved it, yes, but it was far older than the war, older than the Reclaimers. And at its center stood a chamber sealed in obsidian glass. What is this place? Cade whispered, stepping slowly forward. Nea didn't answer. Her eyes were wide, lips parted, as if her body remembered this room before her mind did. She reached out with one trembling hand, and the seal broke silently, the obsidian folding open like petals of night. Inside was a chair, small, child-sized, wires as fine as silk webbed around it, some severed, others humming faintly with residual charge. And in the air hung a scent Cade had nearly forgotten, warmth, like skin and copper and old tears. They built this for me, Nia said at last, her voice as small as the echoes around them. Cade turned to her, confused. The Reclaimers? No, she said slowly, your people. The words stopped him. She stepped into the chamber, and suddenly her glow returned in pulses, responding to the room like an old machine recognizing its key. My first memory is of this room, she said, running her fingers along the frame. I was born here, not from a womb, but from pain. Human scientists found pieces of Reclaimer DNA in the wreckage of the first invasion. They thought if they could shape something in between, something familiar, they could make peace before the second wave. Kate's mouth was dry. They made you? They made dozens, she said. I was the only one who didn't. Scream myself to death in the first week. He staggered back a step, not out of fear, but from the gravity of it. She wasn't just an alien. She wasn't even fully alien. She was us. A fragment of humanity grown in alien mold. A weapon disguised as a child. Or maybe a child forced into the shape of a weapon. You said you didn't remember, Kate said, barely more than breath. I didn't, she replied. But this place is like a wound that remembers how it was made. Every second I stand here, it comes back. Why didn't we protect you? He asked, voice cracking. We tried, she said, her voice thickening. The scientists who made me didn't want a soldier. They wanted a translator, a peacemaker. But when the Reclaimers saw what we'd done, when they realized we'd taken their genome and mated it with empathy, they came down with fire. Not to destroy cities, to destroy me. Cade looked around at the cracked walls, the cables, the words etched behind glass. Messages, names, prayers. This wasn't a lab. It was a tomb. They buried me in code, Nia continued. Stasis programs. Dream loops. They scattered false signals across the world so the Reclaimers couldn't track me. But it was never meant to last. Eventually, I woke up. And you found me. You were the first face I saw that didn't scream, she said. That didn't want anything. You just stood there. Cade dropped to his knees, overwhelmed. It was too much, not just her pain. All of it, the war, the loss, the failed chances. He thought of his sister again, her laugh in the summer before the sky broke. He remembered the final radio transmission from his village, not words, just her humming an old lullaby, and the way the signal had cut out mid-note. He had buried his heart so deep it couldn't feel anymore. But now, in the dark, beside a child who shouldn't exist, it began to burn again. Nia knelt beside him. Her hand, glowing faintly, rested on his shoulder. I need to go in, she said softly, and to the machine. There's data in me. Language, frequencies, the last. Messages we were meant to send. But I'm afraid. Afraid of what? He asked, his throat tight. That I won't come back. Cade looked into her eyes, searching for something to promise. Something real. But all he had was what humans had always had. The stubborn. We'll just stand beside those who shouldn't have to stand alone. Then I'll stay right here, he said. Until you do. And in that moment, the ancient chamber began to glow again, not with Reclaimer fire, but with human memory. Warmth spread through the walls. The chair pulsed with forgotten dreams. And as Nia stepped into it, wires curling. Gently around her arms like vines finding a long-lost tree. Cade sat at the base of the chair and closed his eyes. He would not leave, not again. At first, there was only silence, not the kind that comes from quiet, but the heavy kind that follows when something deep in the world has been disturbed. Cade sat cross-legged on the cold stone floor, the light from the machine casting long, shifting shadows across his face. His hands rested on his knees, cracked fingers trembling slightly, not from cold now, but from something deeper. Anticipation twisted with dread. The chamber hummed around him like a living thing remembering how to breathe, how to dream. Inside the chair, Nia had gone still, her body rigid as the tendrils of the machine folded over her like the petals of a closing flower. Then she screamed out. It wasn't a cry of pain. Not exactly, more like a broadcast of every memory igniting. At once. Her voice echoed through the walls, through Cade's bones, through the very stone as if history itself had cracked open. Images flashed in the air like flickering film reels, cities falling under emerald fire, ships bursting in silence above the clouds, children hiding in flooded ruins, humans begging not for rescue, but for someone to simply remember they existed. And in all of them, she was there, watching, remembering, absorbing. Nia, Cade whispered, stumbling to his feet. You have to slow down. But she couldn't. The machine, this cradle of creation and grief, had awakened. Not just her memories, but the long-dormant defense systems still wired into her DNA. She convulsed once, twice, and then light poured from her mouth and eyes. Not pure, not clean. This was the color of loss made visible. It scalded the floor, cracked the walls, sent hairline fractures through the seal that kept the tunnel from collapsing inward. And then, from above, a sound even worse than the scream. The shriek of reclaimer drones. Cade's head jerked up toward the ceiling. The reclaimers had found them. Maybe it was the pulse from the machine. Maybe it was Nia's awakening. Or maybe they had always known and were only waiting for the moment she was most vulnerable. The sound of steel limbs scraping stone echoed. From higher tunnels, sharp, fast, efficient. They were coming. He turned back to Nia. Her body hovered now, limbs suspended like a marionette caught mid-pose. The light around her was unstable, flickering, thrumming in waves. He knew the signs. She was an overload, a living bridge between species, memories, codes, and if he pulled her out too soon, she could shatter. But if he waited too long, she would burn out entirely. I won't let them take you, he said, a promise spoken into fire. He bolted to the side panel of the chamber, old Earth tech, patched with alien glyphs, and slammed his hand against the manual override. The screen blinked red, then green. He bypassed the safeties, opened the stream loop, and whispered into the machine, "Give me access. I'm not your enemy." A panel slid open. Inside were 2 neural jacks, dusty but intact. Cade stared at them. He had used one of these before. Once, long ago, during the siege of Quito. It had nearly killed him. Neural feedback had fried half his memories. He'd been different afterward, quieter, angrier, but now, the jack might be the only thing that could reach Nia from inside. The overload loop. Her mind was trapped in billions of unsorted moments, her identity being swallowed by a flood of meaning too big for one soul to carry. He grabbed the interface, shoved the port into the base of his skull, still scarred from before, and bit down on a strip of leather from his glove. Pain was instant. Electric. His mind was torn from his body and thrown into the storm. At first, there was no shape. Only sound, voices crying out in 100 languages, questions without answers, screams without names. He spun through it, a grain of dust in a hurricane of memory, until a voice broke through. Cade. It was her. But not the Nia he knew. This voice was smaller, afraid. He turned, and there she was, standing in a fractured version of the chamber, her skin flickering between alien and human, her eyes filled with data pouring like tears. Around her, memories swirled like a storm, both hers and others. Every child lost, every promise broken, every plea unanswered. I can't hold them all, she cried. It's too much. You don't have to, Cade said, stepping toward her, his form barely holding in the chaos. Let me carry it with you. I was made to endure this, she sobbed, not you. And we were made to feel it, he replied, reaching for her hand. That's the difference. That's what they never understood. When he touched her, the storm cracked. For a moment, light bled out in every direction, warm and golden. Not alien. Not synthetic. Human. Memories began to calm. The storm slowed. Faces returned to names. Screams softened to lullabies, but the real world was less forgiving. Above them, the ceiling cracked. Dust poured down. The reclaimers were nearly through. Cade's eyes snapped open in his body just as Nia's light dimmed to a steady glow. She gasped back in the chair, tears streaking her face. Her voice was hoarse but clear. I remember everything. And outside the tunnel door, claws scraped steel. The last defense had come. Cade pulled the jack from his skull, blood trailing down his neck. His vision blurred, but he smiled. You're not alone anymore, he said, drawing a jagged length of pipe from the floor. No gun. No armor. Just a man with nothing left to give, except everything, asterisk. The steel above them groaned like an old god waking from a poisoned dream. Dust rained down, thick and choking, as something massive drove its weight into the chamber ceiling. Cade stood with his back to Nia, pipe gripped in bleeding hands, eyes fixed on the cracked entrance. His breath steamed in shallow bursts, lungs tight with exhaustion and something else, resolve born not from victory, but from the refusal to vanish without meaning. Behind him, Nia struggled to rise, the glow of her veins fading in rhythm with the pulsing core of the machine. She had returned from the storm inside herself, but she was fragile now, like a phoenix still wet from rebirth. She was alive, but she was no longer indestructible. Then the ceiling split open, and death fell in. The first reclaimer dropped like a vulture forged from glass and bone. Its limbs sharp, its face blank, a helmet fused to pale steel, with no eyes, no mouth, only a sensor ring that blinked red. Others followed, fanning out in silent precision, four-legged, spider-like, metal tails twitching with lethal promise. They didn't speak. Reclaimers never did. They simply approached, weapons warming, scanning for resistance. They saw Cade, unarmed, trembling, eyes bloodshot, and paused, calculating the threat. He didn't wait. With a roar pulled from the ruins of every dead village and fallen child, Cade rushed the first reclaimer. The pipe smashed against its joint with a shattering clang, denting but not breaking. Sparks flew. The machine spun, tail whipping toward his chest, but he dropped low, sweeping its legs from beneath it in a brutal arc. It hit the ground with a sound like collapsing bone. Before it could recover, he jammed the pipe through the exposed spine. Blue energy bled out like smoke. The reclaimer twitched once, then, when still, the others moved as one. Cade spun, ducking and weaving, but his body was failing. A knee popped, his ribs screamed, his vision narrowed. The second drone caught him in the shoulder with a plasma spike. Pain exploded through his body. He staggered, fell, but swung blindly. The pipe caught the drone's sensor ring. The machine reeled, disoriented, and he drove his boot into its chest until it cracked open like dry wood. 2. Down, but 5 remained. They circled. Nia screamed his name. He turned toward her, and in that moment, a tail sliced across his back, dragging fire through muscle. He collapsed to his knees, coughing blood, the pipe slipping from numb fingers. A reclaimer stepped forward, arm raised for the final strike. Its blade gleamed, coated in his blood. Behind it, Nia clutched the chair, trying to rise, but her legs trembled too much. Cade looked up, teeth red, and smiled. "You always come in numbers," he coughed. "Never alone, cowards." The blade fell. It never landed. A wave of force, invisible and absolute, erupted from the center of the chamber. The machines froze mid-motion, their limbs twitching. The walls pulsed with warmth, not fire, not electricity. Emotion, grief, hope, memory, everything Mia had carried within her, unleashed in a single instant. It poured into the drones like poison, rewiring their code with the unfiltered chaos of human suffering. One by one, they staggered back and began to scream, not audibly. Reclaimers had no mouths, but their bodies spasmed, lights flickering, as if they were being shown something too large for their programming to bear. Visions of mothers clutching children in collapsing homes, of lovers dying beneath shattered stars, of old men digging graves with their bare hands. Not data. Not numbers. Feeling. 2 reclaimers toward their own limbs, malfunctioning. Another collapsed, hissing steam. The last 2 turned and fled, crashing through the walls in desperation, desperate to escape the flood of sorrow. Cade watched them go, barely able to lift his head. Nia stood in the center of it all, her glow no longer flickering but steady, golden. Her hair floated around her as if underwater. Her eyes wept, not tears, but drops of glowing memory, sorrow made liquid. She had given them what they feared most, not war, not weapons, but humanity. She staggered toward him, falling to her knees. "Cade," she sobbed, catching his broken body in her arms. "You can't, you shouldn't have." He laughed, weakly. "Don't you get it, kid? That's what we do. We fall. We bleed, but we don't stop." She pressed her forehead to his. "Why?" He met her gaze, and even as blood filled his mouth, his voice was clear. "Because someone has Tashao. Them who we are." And in the heart of the ancient machine, surrounded by the wreckage of monsters and memories, she held him as the tower began to collapse. Not from battle, but from understanding. The tower crumbled slowly, like a dying breath drawn out over the snowblind silence of a world long since abandoned by hope. The collapse was not violent, not a thunderous war cry, not a scream of metal and flame, but a quiet surrender. As if even the Reclaimers' machines, their godless monoliths of surveillance and power, had grown tired of pretending they owned the earth. The sky wept ash and dust in a slow gray rain, and beneath the broken ribs of the fallen tower, a single light still pulsed, steady and warm, like a heartbeat refusing to fade. Naya sat amidst the ruin, her arms wrapped tightly around Cade's limp body. The machine behind them, the ancient interface, the memory chamber that had birthed and broken her, had gone dark. Its final act had been not destruction, but illumination. It had made her remember. It had shown her what humanity had been. Willing to endure, and what one man had been willing to become, not to win, but to protect something he couldn't even name. Not just her, but what she represented. A child born from two legacies, neither fully hers. A bridge no one else had dared to cross. Cade, she whispered again, as if the name alone might stir him. His eyes were closed. His breath faint. His chest moved, but barely. The injuries were too deep. The blood too much. He had given everything Dot, and yet he was still there, Dot, not by strength, but by choice. Around them, the world was quiet. The snow had begun to fall again, soft and clean, covering the debris of violence with the tenderness of time. The Reclaimer. Drones lay shattered and still. No reinforcements came. No ships, no orders. It was as if they had all vanished the moment they were forced to feel. To see Dot I rock slowly, her forehead against Cade's, her tears carving glowing lines down her cheeks. Inside her now was everything, every song, every letter, every dying whisper captured by the memory archives before humanity's cities had fallen. She had inherited not just data, but essence. Suffering, yes, but love too. Laughter in the dark. Stories passed between hands like fire in the cold. And all of it, had lived inside him too. He hadn't saved her by fighting. He'd saved her by believing. I'm not done, she said softly, brushing the hair from his blood-stained brow. You showed me what we are, what we can be. Her voice trembled. Now it's my turn. She stood slowly, letting his head rest on her coat, wrapped gently beneath him. She walked to the center of the chamber, where the wreckage of the machine pulsed with dying energy. And from within herself, she called it back to life, not with force, with memory. She opened her mind, the memories of 1,000 lost souls, the hopes of a dying world, the final words of the forgotten. She gave them back, not as vengeance, but as gift. And the world responded. Dot, all across the dead continent, Reclaimer towers flickered, their signals fractured, their systems faltered. The same data that had destroyed the drones now bled into their networks like light through cracks in glass. A virus of memory. Not malicious, just human, overwhelming, unstoppable, beautiful. The Reclaimers did not scream. They simply stopped. And then silence. The snow fell uninterrupted now. Time passed. Cade awoke to warmth. Not heat, not sunlight, but warmth. A living presence beside him. He opened his eyes slowly, every muscle aching, lungs raw. But he was alive. Somehow. I sat beside him, legs crossed, her hair now darker, no longer shimmering constantly, but falling naturally against her skin. She looked older, not by age, by gravity. She had carried the weight, and she had not been broken by it. You're awake, she said softly. He managed a rough smile. I told you I'd stay. She nodded. I didn't leave. They sat. There, man and child, human and something more, beneath the shattered sky of a world finally beginning to heal. You did it, he said, voice raspy. You turned their weapons against them? No, she replied. I turned us toward them. I showed them what they tried so hard to erase. Cade's eyes filled with tears. Do you think it'll matter? Nia looked out across the horizon, where the towers once stood, now nothing but quiet bones in the snow. I think, she said slowly, it already has. Far in the distance, a signal shimmered, not a weapon. A beacon. Human. Survivors, maybe? Or just a promise. She helped Cade to his feet, their shadows long and side by side. The path ahead was uncertain, broken, cold. But it was theirs. And with each step forward, the past echoed not with sorrow, but with song.